Yo, what's up, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Fancast Live Podcast. I'm yours truly, Giancarlo, your host. In this episode, we're obviously going to be taking you back and reviewing the first half of the New York Mets season, and we'll look at the state of the New York Mets heading into the second half of the season after a horrific start to the first half. They're 42 and 48 heading into the second half. They are 18 and a half games back of the NL East leading Atlanta Braves, 7 games back of the third wild card spot. So a lot of work to be done here by the New York Mets in the next 15 days. We're going to take a look at all these things in this episode, and I'm going to give you my prediction of what I think the Mets should do come trade deadline on August the 1st, which is less than 3 weeks from now. Mets have 15 games to play between the start of the second half and the trade deadline, so that they're not going to have a whole lot of time to do this in. So they're going to have to start winning and start winning fast, because quite honestly, if they don't start winning, this season could be over before the second half even begins. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, let's talk about some of the biggest disappointments for the 2023 New York Mets. Obviously, we already spoke about their record, 42 and 48. Not something we really expected out of the New York Mets in 2023 after a 101-win season in 2022. A lot of things have gone wrong. There has been very little pitching. There's been, hitting has been inconsistent. The bullpen has been a disaster. When there's hitting, there's no pitching. When there's pitching, there's no hitting. The bullpen has not been able to hold on to leads. They've not been able to keep the team in games when they don't have the lead. So it's been a big, big mess for the New York Mets thus far. Obviously, it all begins with the injury to Edwin Diaz at the WBC. A lot of people, reflected on that and thought that, Major League Baseball players shouldn't participate in the WBC. I think they're wrong in a way, because, quite honestly, when you look at the World Cup in soccer, there are plenty of professional soccer players that go and participate and represent their countries. The WBC is no different. I know it's not on the same scale as the World Cup, but, to be quite honest, these players want to represent their countries. They want to participate and play for their countries, and they want to win under their country's flag. And I don't have anything against that. Edwin Diaz's injury was a freak accident. It had nothing to do with him playing in the game. It was during a end-of-game celebration when obviously, Puerto Rico defeated the Dominican Republic in the game. During the WBC, he was jumping around in celebration with all of his teammates out in the middle of the field when he accidentally stepped on somebody's foot, and he ends up hurting his leg and required surgery. He's out for the season. At least that's what they think. There's still word that there might be a slight chance that he might make it back before the end of the season. I think with the Mets being where they are right now, I don't think the Mets should rush Edwin Diaz back for the 2023 season. I think they should just let him rehab, let him rest up, let him get into game shape for the 2024 season and beyond. The month of June was a complete disaster. Up until that point, the Mets were around just slightly above or just slightly around 500 on the season. And every time we felt that the Mets were turning the corner, it was one step forward and 2 steps back. Same situation at the end of the first half of the season when the Mets were on a 6-game win streak, and then they go in for 3 games in San Diego. They win the first game of that series to give them that 6 in a row, and then they lose the next 2 before the All-Star break. And it was sort of a momentum killer for me, because of the fact that, quite honestly, had the Mets at least won 2 of the 3 against San Diego heading into the All-Star break, I wouldn't be so upset, and it wouldn't have been a momentum killer for me. But because they won 6 in a row and then lose 2 in a row heading into the break, I mean, how many games did the Mets pick up during that 6-game win streak? One game if they were lucky, because the likes of the Atlanta Braves keep winning. The Marlins keep winning. The Phillies are also winning. Everybody in the division is winning, and everybody else in front of them in the wild card kind of, has had their ups and downs as well, just as bad as the Mets have. So, quite honestly, they're just where they were before that 6-game win streak. So, when we look at some of the disappointments, Scherzer and Verlander obviously have to be two of the biggest disappointments in 2023. Verlander coming off a AL Cy Young Award-winning season with the Houston Astros last year. His ERA, I believe, was just below 2 or just around 2 last year. He won a ton of games, and he was very successful, and that was a year after Tommy John surgery. And then it seemed as though Houston wasn't going to re-sign him for the big money that he wanted. Supposedly, Houston only offered him maybe 20, 25 million. The Mets offered him 43. That was a no-brainer for him to leave Houston and come to New York. But quite honestly, he hasn't been the same pitcher this year. He obviously started the season on the IL, was hurt for a good portion of the first month or so, and he still doesn't seem to be in game shape yet. And it's, you kind of think and wonder, like, why is it taking him so long to get it going and get his pitches to where they need to be? I don't know. There's probably reasons behind that. Maybe he's still hurt. He's still hurting. Who knows? Scherzer, another guy. He had a phenomenal season for the Mets last year, and then towards the end of the season, he kind of took a dip. The loss, the sweep at the hand of the Atlanta Braves last year was the beginning of the end for Max Scherzer. He didn't have a very good series against Atlanta, and then that start in the wild card series against San Diego, he wasn't very good in it either. And it seems as though in 2023 he's picked up where he left off, and that to me is a problem, because for a guy who's making $43.3 million, so is Verlander, this is unacceptable. Can't have that. They need to do better. They need to perform better, specifically in the big spots, because Scherzer just has not been a pitcher that's pitched well in big spots. He's got a slider that during the course of his career has gotten a lot of strikeouts, and for some reason this year he's leaving him over the plate, and hitters are taking him out of the ballpark, and that's a problem. So if you want to look at two big disappointments, those are two big ones right there. Obviously, we already spoke about the Edwin Diaz injury. That was a huge disappointment, because, quite honestly, the bullpen has suffered because of the Edwin Diaz injury. Also because Billy Epler, the general manager of the New York Mets, didn't go out and sign more arms to add depth to the back end of this bullpen, being that Edwin Diaz was going to be lost for the season. But he felt comfortable going with Robertson as his closer and Ottavino, Bailey, and Smith as his setup guys, or bridges to Robertson, and would go with the signings that he did in the offseason, where he signed a whole bunch of guys to minor league contracts because he wanted different options. So, for instance, he wanted to go with pitchers that he can send up and down through the minors, and dictate when he wanted to use them and when he didn't want to use them. When he was going to use them, he was going to have them up on a roster. When he didn't, he was going to send them down and bring somebody else up. But that's been the problem. These guys have not performed well. Your Leones, your Hardwigs, your Walkers, your Curtises. These guys just have not gotten the job done. For the most part, starting pitching hasn't done what they needed to do to get the team deep into games, and the bullpen has suffered, because starting pitching has averaged about 4.5 to 5 innings of pitching, and the bullpen would have to come in and try to hold the fort down until the Mets offense would kick into all cylinders and try to gain the lead, and then leave it up to the back end of the bullpen to try and close things out. That just hasn't worked out for Billy Epler. So if you want to blame Billy Epler for that, you could blame him. But in the end, it's how the players perform in the field that dictate the wins and losses on the season for the New York Mets. the rest of the rotation besides Verlander and Scherzer just hasn't been very good. I think Kodai Senga obviously has been the best pitcher for the New York Mets in that rotation, quite honestly, even though he himself has walked a lot of guys and he at times has not been able to get out of the first 5 innings. But he has been the most consistent. And then when you look at the back end of this rotation, specifically with guys like Carlos Carrasco, Tyler McGill, David Peterson, specifically McGill and Peterson, who last year performed very well in the absence of Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer when they were out on the IL. They're not doing the same thing they did last year. They're obviously not performing as well as they did last year. They're not filling in with the same performance as in 2022. They just haven't been the same. David Peterson has seen himself go down to AAA at least on 1 or 2 occasions this season so far. He's now back up. But with Jose Quintana coming back, there's a good possibility that David Peterson might be the odd man out in this rotation. He might go to the bullpen. He might be sent down to AAA. Who knows? But either way, McGill, Peterson just have not been the same pitchers as in 2022, and that's hurt the New York Mets, specifically during times when Scherzer was hurt or serving his 10-game suspension, or when Verlander was out for the good portion of the first month and a half of the season. Quintana, I just mentioned him. He obviously has missed the first half of the season. He is going to be back for the second half of the season. Exactly how the Mets plan on using him right off the bat. Is he going to be, a guy that's going to fall between Verlander and Scherzer? Is he going to be somebody that's going to be behind Senga in the back end of the rotation? Is he going to be the fifth guy? Is he going to be the fourth guy? I don't know exactly how the Mets are planning to use Quintana, but the important thing for Quintana here is to get off to a good start. He hasn't had He hasn't had any good performances during his rehab stint down at AAA. And that's probably concerning to a lot of people, but I wouldn't really put too much on that because of the fact that Jose Quintana is just putting things together. It's sort of like his spring training. So hopefully when he gets himself going here in the second half, he's going to be able to help this New York Mets pitching staff and, help the Mets rotation significantly. So as bad as pitching has been, obviously the offense has been very inconsistent. Guys like Francisco Lindor got off to a slow start, although his power numbers are there. Pete Alonso got off to a pretty good start, but he hasn't been hitting all that much lately. His average has come down a good 50, 60 points since May and even early parts of June. McNeil and Marte have been struggling. Their averages are down. Their on-base percentages are down. Their OPSs are down. That's a problem for the New York Mets offense. If these guys can't get themselves going in the first 15 games in the second half of the season, you can definitely bet that the Mets will be sellers at the trade deadline instead of buyers. So they need to get going. Brandon Nimmo has been really, really good. His on-base percentage is down slight bit, but his power numbers are up, which is nice. So to me, the Mets are getting their money's worth out of Brandon Nimmo. He's playing a really good center field. And the only thing that I haven't seen yet in 2023 out of Brandon Nimmo was the fact that he hasn't stolen any bases. This was something that Brandon Nimmo had spoken about at the beginning of the season, something that he wanted to add to his repertoire as far as when he got on base. And he just hasn't done that. I think he's got 3 stolen bases on the season. We need to see a lot more out of that. For a guy who's leading off for the New York Mets and who's got a pretty decent on-base percentage, we just don't see the high number of stolen base attempts out of Brandon Nimmo that we would like to see. So I like to see more of that out of Brandon Nimmo. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if it's something that maybe his coaches are telling him not to run. Maybe he wants to run and they're not letting him run. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons behind it, but the fact that he only has 3 stolen bases in the first half of the season is something that jumps out at me as far as Brandon Nimmo is concerned. The DH position obviously has not produced. It's finally starting to produce now. Tommy Pham, who was not a big fan favorite to begin the season, has really come on strong to end the first half of the season, I should say. He's been hitting very well. He's been hitting for power, and he's been driving in runs, and he's gotten some big hits for the New York Mets. But the fact of the matter is that he's done so well that the Mets have put him in left field now instead of DHing, and Mark Hanna has now gone to the bench, or he himself has been DHing when needed. That was nice to see. Daniel Vogelbach, to me, has no value on this New York Mets roster. He gives you no value whatsoever because he doesn't play a position. He only DHs. He can't run. When he gets on base, he's not on base a lot. I know he's been hitting slightly bit better than he was in the first half, and earlier parts of the first half of the season, but still, it's not good enough for me to warrant him to be in the lineup almost every day. I think that the Mets have better hitters on the bench that they can use in DH spots, and they need to utilize them, and they need to utilize them more frequently than Daniel Vogelbach. To me, quite honestly, $1.5 million. I can't see how this guy is even on this roster at this point. Each are $1.5 million. Get rid of him, DFA him, and go and get yourself a bigger bat. I know Nelson Cruz's name has come up, but quite honestly, Nelson Cruz at the age of 43, I think he's done. I think some teams are looking at him, but I think eventually he's going to decide he's going to hang up his cleats and retire. We already spoke about Starling Marte and Jeff McNeil. They need to get their shit together. Marte, for a guy who's been criticized a lot this year for his defense, and his defense is being criticized because of his dual groin surgery in the offseason. Quite honestly, I call BS on that because of the fact that when you look at Starling Marte's numbers, he's got 23 stolen bases. So what exactly is the reason why he is struggling defensively out in the field is beyond me. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but Starling Marte he needs to start producing like he was last year. The Mets really need him to produce like he was last year. Jeff McNeil, who's coming off a batting title in the National League, has to do better. His average is way down. These are things that would help the Mets tremendously, specifically to start the second half of the season with 15 games to go before the trade deadline. Francisco Lindor, I spoke about him just briefly a little while ago. His average was down a bit this year, sort of like his first full season with the New York Mets in 2019. He is actually started to come on strong to end the first half. I think he's going to have a tremendously big second half of the New York Mets. His power numbers are up. He's driving in runs. He's gotten some big hits for the New York Mets in the first half. I hope that continues for him in the second half. And Pete Alonso obviously needs to get his average up, needs to stop chasing those sliders outside on the outside part of the plate, and needs to be a bit more disciplined if he wants to start getting that average up in the second half of the season. So basically, if the Mets' intentions are to be buyers at the trade deadline, they're going to need the likes of Alonso, Lindor, Marte, McNeil, Nimmo, and one of the big surprises, and we're going to talk about him in a minute here, is Francisco Alvarez to tear it up. They really need to perform big for the New York Mets in the next 15 games. Otherwise, the season is going to be over. So some of the biggest surprises, obviously, I just named one of them, Francisco Alvarez. This is a kid, 21 years old, who the Mets did not put on the opening day roster to start the season, and a lot of Mets fans were upset about that because, quite honestly, they wanted to see this superstar in the making, Francisco Alvarez, be in the lineup every day and start showing off some of the some of his skills to the New York fans. And he didn't quite get that chance until Narvaez got hurt. He was finally called up, and obviously Mets fans started to get a very bad feeling as far as Francisco Alvarez was concerned, because when he was called up, soon after he was called up, he struggled at the plate. He looked like he was, overmatched against Major League pitching, and That was not something Mets fans were ready to see. But then something clicked. With the snap of a finger, Francisco Alvarez finally put it together. He finally started to hit. And when he started to hit, he started to put the ball in a gap. And then before he knew it, he started to hit home runs. And before he knew it, he was getting big hits. And before he knew it, he was hitting big shots in big spots for the New York Mets. And that's definitely one of the biggest surprises thus far in the 2023 season. Francisco Alvarez, I think, is here to stay. I know there was a lot of talk that when Narvaez was going to come back, that he was going to be sent back down. But quite honestly, he's been hitting for the New York Mets on a consistent basis, and he's been getting a lot of big hits, and he's gotten a lot of home runs. He's got 16 now on the season, and that ties Travis d'Arnaud for the rookie catcher record as far as home runs are concerned. And I see him definitely breaking that record within the next couple of days after the second half of the season begins, if not the first night against the Dodgers on Friday. Brandon Nimmo obviously has been a big surprise for me because of the fact that in the offseason he signed that big contract. And when he signed that contract, I really felt that Brandon Nimmo was going to be one of those players who's going to take the money and run. He was going to take that money and he was going to forget about, putting it all together for the New York Mets and helping the New York Mets and making winners out of the New York Mets. And quite honestly, he's proven me wrong. He's hitting 266 on the season. Maybe you want to see that average come up a little bit. He's got 13 home runs on 91 hits. He's got 13 doubles, 4 triples. He's got 41 ribbies. And again, like I mentioned earlier, only 3 stolen bases on the season. I like to see that come up. But quite honestly, Brandon Nimmo has been a big surprise for me, especially after he signed that big contract. He's really paid off for the New York Mets. He's hitting big spots. He's got a grand slam, specifically in that game against the Atlanta Braves. That was awesome. And I only see him getting better and better as the season progresses and as his career progresses. So that was a big surprise for me. Dave Robertson is another huge surprise. This is a guy the Mets signed to a 1-year deal worth, I think, $10 million in the offseason to come in and be the setup guy behind Edwin Diaz. And then, of course, with the Edwin Diaz injury, he now fills in for Edwin Diaz as the closer. And he's been phenomenal for the New York Mets. Like Edwin Diaz in 2022, Robertson has done everything the New York Mets have asked him to do, whether it's, coming in the 7th or 8th innings to face the opposing heart of the batting order, to shut them down, and then let Ottavino and Drew Smith do the rest in the 8th and 9th innings, or even the 9th inning, whenever, Robertson was called in to get the big outs. He's done it all. But unfortunately, with Robertson moving up one spot in the back end of that bullpen and becoming the closer, there's one less guy in the New York Mets bullpen to help the middle relief. And it's unfortunate, and we've seen the results. And hopefully the New York Mets somehow, some way will find ways to improve in that category, because quite honestly, if you don't have the middle relief to keep you in games or to hold on to leads before the back end of that bullpen comes into a game to try and close it out, you're not going to win a lot of games. And their record of 42-48 is evident of that. Kodai Senga, we spoke about him earlier. Kodai Senga obviously is one of the biggest surprises this year. To me, he's been clearly the ace of this pitching staff. It hasn't been Scherzer. It hasn't been Verlander. It's been Kodai Senga. I like to see some things improve on Kodai Senga. His walks have to come down. His strikeouts are exactly where they need to be, because he's got that out pitch and the fork, that ghost fork pitch. And that's why it's surprising to me that he's walked so many hitters up to this point, because of the fact that he's got that out pitch that gets hitters out. Again, he needs to bring that down, and I think he's going to be in the conversation at the end of the season for Rookie of the Year. So what can we expect from the New York Mets in the second half of the season? Like I've already mentioned, as the Mets get off with this series against the Dodgers to start off the second half of the season, they're going to have 15 games before the trade deadline. 3 at home against the Dodgers, 3 at home against the White Sox, 3 on the road against the Red Sox, 2 on the road against the Yankees before coming back home for a 4-game set against the Nationals. Now, in order for the Mets to be in the playoff hunt, I think they need to go at least 11-4 in those 15 games. And quite honestly, when you look at the competition and you look at how the Mets have performed in the first half of the season, you're probably thinking to yourself, that's going to be highly unlikely that the Mets win 11 games and lose only 4 in those 15 games to get themselves 1 game over 500. So what do the Mets have to do if they don't perform and don't get that 11-4 record? It all depends on what the teams in front of them do. Obviously, you have the Phillies, the Marlins, the Brewers, the Giants, the Padres, the Cubs. These are all teams in front of the New York Mets, but they're all within striking distance. So even if the Mets were to go, say, 10-5 or 9-6 during that 15-game span, and the teams in front of them lose more than the 6 that the Mets lose, the Mets obviously are gaining on their competition in front of them. Hopefully they've, jumped over a few of those teams and made things a bit more interesting. But the fact of the matter is it worth it for the New York Mets to be buyers at the trade deadline, even if they are within striking distance of that third and final wild card spot? They're 7 games back from that wild card spot, that third and final wild card spot. It's doable. I'm not saying it's not doable. But in order for the Mets to get back in this, they need to get to 500 rather quickly. They have 15 games to do it. I've already mentioned that. A lot of things need to happen for the New York Mets to go on an 11-4 run. Their offense needs to click on all cylinders. Their starting pitching needs to go deep into games. Their bullpen needs to hold on to leads, and the back end of their bullpen needs to close things out. All those things need to happen for the Mets to be successful in the next 15 games. If that doesn't happen, the Mets should sell. Now, the next thing I say is something a lot of Mets fans are probably not going to like. Me personally, with the way the Mets season has gone thus far in 2023, I think regardless of whether the Mets go 15-0 or 11-4 or 9-6 or 10-5 in the second half of the season to start off before the All-Star break, the Mets should sell. Hear me out. The reason why I think the New York Mets should sell is because I feel that this is an opportunity for them to replenish the farm system, because guys like Verlander, Scherzer, Robertson, Ottavino, Raley, and so on and so forth are the type of players that are going to bring back top-tier prospects, specifically pitchers, because that's what the Mets really need to replenish in their farm system, or top-tier prospects or major league ready prospects that they can take away from teams that probably don't see a future with their current teams. I think that is the direction the New York Mets should go with. And when you really think about it, how quickly the Mets farm system can replenish with the talent that they can get back for these players will only help them succeed in 2024 and beyond. Cohen can still go in the offseason and spend all his money and surround these young players with, other elite players, younger elite players, players who can come in here and fill whatever void that they need to fill, and still surround that young talent with veteran talent. Cohen can still go out there and spend money. I have no problem with that. But the important thing here is to replenish the farm system, develop some top-notch pitching, who will be able to help you in 2024 and maybe as close as 2025, because quite honestly, the talent that the Mets have as far as pitchers are concerned, even with the draft they just had last week, these pitchers are not going to see the major league level for at least 3, 4, 5 years. Some of these guys are kids. 18 years old, 19 years old, 20 years old. Some of them are 21 years old. How far are they from the major league level? That's why you take these guys, you trade them, you bring back major league ready talent, top tier talent, replenish your farm system, get ready for 2024. Whatever you need, you go out and sign in free agency, and you're back to being a competitive team in 2024 once again. It's quite simple. I think that's where the Mets should head in the second half of the season, regardless of how they perform in the first 15 games leading up to the August 1st trade deadline. It's quite simple. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just say the Mets go 11-4. And at the trade deadline, they're a game over 500. They're, let's say, 4 or 5 games out of the third and final wild card spot. You keep Scherzer, you keep Verlander, you keep Robertson, and you never get into the wild card race, and you don't make the postseason. Robertson's going to walk away at the end of the season as a free agent because he only signed a 1-year contract, so you're going to let him walk away for nothing. Scherzer and Verlander are still going to be here next year. Who knows how good or how bad they'll be next season when you think about their performance this year. Kodai Senga is going to be here. He's going to be here for a while. Jose Quintana is going to be here for at least one more season because he signed a 2-year deal. Carlos Carrasco is most likely going to be gone. And then you're left with Dave Peterson, Tyler McGill, Joey Lucchesi, Budo, and whoever else is in the at AAA. So if the Mets don't make the postseason, would it be worth it to hold on to these guys only to be disappointed and then just wish you would have sold come the end of the season when you find out, well, the Mets are going to be going home because they aren't making the postseason because they didn't catch up to the teams in front of them? I don't think the Mets can afford to be buyers at the trade deadline, regardless of how good or how bad they perform in the next 15 games. The Dodgers are tied for first place with the Diamondbacks. They're a very good team. They're facing some adversity with their starting rotation, but yet they still find themselves tied for first place. They're a very good team. Then you get 3 against the White Sox, who, quite honestly, for the second year in a row, were handpicked to go to the World Series. And for the second year in a row, they're not going to make it there. So they're going to be sellers. Maybe the Mets have a chance of winning some games there. 2 out of 3. A sweep maybe, if they're lucky. Then you get 3 against the Red Sox, who, mind you, they're in last place, but they're over 500. I think there are a handful of games over 500, sitting in last place in the AL East. They're a very good team. They're in a tough division, which probably explains the reason why they're 5 games over 500 and not maybe 15. The AL East is a monster division. Look at the Yankees. They haven't fared well in their own division. Tampa Bay keeps beating them. They keep playing 500 ball against Toronto and Boston. And the Orioles, split a 4-game set a week or so ago. So, and then after the White Sox, after the Red Sox, they get 2 more games against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. Now, granted, the Yankees are still struggling offensively, and their pitching is struggling as well because of all the injuries. But let's just say you get a split out of those 2 games like you did back at Citi Field. Right now, you're probably not looking at 4 losses right there. just in the first 4 series. And then you come home and face the Nationals for 4. Last place team in the NL East, probably the worst team in the National League. If you get a 4-game sweep out of the Nationals, maybe a year ago, it'd be a guaranteed thing that the Mets get a sweep of the Nationals in this 4-game set. But it's not 2022. This is not the same 101 win team from a year ago. They're 6 games under 500. So can they get a 4-game sweep out of the Nationals? You would hope they would, depending on how the offense is playing, how the pitching is performing, and how the bullpen is doing. So are 11 games doable? Maybe. But 1 game over 500 at the trade deadline, depending on what the teams in front of you are do in those 15 games, I don't take the risk. I take Verlander, Scherzer, Robertson, Ottavino, Raley, and whoever else you can trade and replenish the farm system. Period. That's what I would do. All right, guys. I hope you did like that show. Post your comments below. Let me know what you think the Mets should do at the trade deadline. Let me know what you thought of the Mets' first half of the season. Do you agree with me that the Mets should be sellers at the trade deadline? If you do, tell me why you think you agree. And if you think the Mets should be buyers, explain why you think the Mets should buy and why you think that you're confident enough that the Mets will make the postseason and, perform well enough to get over quite a number of teams that are ahead of them now in the standings. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Check me out on social media at Fancast Live. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube. Check me out there for more content. Till the next time, let's go Mets. Peace.